The courtroom laughed, not loudly, but enough to hurt. She stood there alone, with empty hands, and a heart already broken. No lawyer, no money, just silence and shame. They looked at her like the case was already over. She stood at the end of the courtroom, fingers trembling, eyes fixed on the floor. The wooden benches felt colder than usual that day. Across the room, her husband sat confidently beside his expensive lawyer, a faint smile on his face like he was watching a show he already knew the ending of. When the judge asked if both sides were ready, her husband leaned back and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a cruel one. "She can't even afford a lawyer," he said loud enough for others to hear. A few people chuckled. Someone whispered. Someone shook their head. She felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was her life being judged by strangers, by whispers, by a man who once promised to protect her. She had sold her jewelry to survive, skipped meals to pay rent, and still, she stood there, painted as weak, poor, and unprepared. The judge looked down at her file, then up at her face. For a moment, the room went quiet. No one noticed the tears she wiped away. No one noticed how hard it was for her to breathe. But something was about to change. Because this courtroom was not done speaking yet. He didn't whisper it. He wanted everyone to hear. "She can't afford a lawyer." The words hit harder than any verdict, and the room slowly turned against her. His voice echoed through the courtroom, sharp and careless. "She can't afford a lawyer," he repeated, this time smiling, as if her struggle was a joke, as if poverty was proof of guilt. A low ripple of laughter spread across the room, not cruel enough to be stopped, but cruel enough to wound. She lifted her eyes for the first time, not in anger, in disbelief. This was the man who once held her hand and promised safety. Now he sat there, polished and confident, using her weakness as a weapon. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing yet. Her mind raced. She remembered the nights she cried in silence, the calls she never returned, the fear of losing everything, not just the case, but her dignity. She wanted to speak, to explain, to scream, but no sound came out. Her lawyer's chair sat empty beside her, a painful reminder that justice often favors those who can afford it. The husband leaned back, satisfied. In his mind, the battle was already won, but he didn't see what the others missed. The way the judge's fingers stopped tapping, the way the courtroom air suddenly felt heavier. The judge looked directly at her now, not at the papers, not at the man who mocked her, at her. And in that look, there was no laughter, only attention. Something had shifted, and the room felt it. The room fell silent, not peaceful silence, the kind that presses on your chest. Even the laughter vanished. Everyone was waiting for one voice. The judge leaned forward, resting both hands on the bench. No words yet, just a long, steady look across the courtroom. The husband's smile began to fade, slowly, almost unnoticed. She stood frozen, unsure whether to breathe or speak. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain others could hear it. This silence felt heavier than the mockery. The judge turned a page, then another. Each sound echoed. The room was no longer watching the man with the expensive lawyer. All eyes shifted to the judge, and then to her. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a burden, not as a joke, but as a person standing alone against something much bigger. The judge glanced at the empty chair beside her, a chair that said everything without saying a word. He adjusted his glasses. The husband shifted in his seat. His confidence cracked, just slightly. He cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. The judge raised one finger. Silence. No interruptions. No laughter. No whispers. The courtroom seemed to shrink, as if the walls themselves were listening. She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, but she didn't hide them this time. This was the moment she feared most. And yet, something told her not to look away. The judge's eyes held hers, and in that pause, that unbearable pause, everything stood still. Whatever came next would change the course of this case forever. She stood alone in the courtroom, no lawyer by her side, no one whispering advice, just her, and the sound of her own heartbeat. Across the room, his lawyer adjusted his tie confidently. Flipping through papers like this case was nothing more than routine. To them, it was paperwork. To her, it was her life. The judge looked up. "Do you have legal representation?" She swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor." A pause followed, a silence heavy enough to crush her chest. She could feel the eyes on her, some curious, some judgmental, some already convinced she was guilty. The lawyer smirked, not openly, just enough for her to notice. He began speaking legal terms, polished arguments, confident lies wrapped in professional language, words she didn't fully understand, but felt were cutting her piece by piece. When it was her turn, she stood up slowly. Her hands trembled. Her voice almost failed her. I don't have money for a lawyer, she said, but I know the truth. The judge nodded, allowing her to continue. She spoke not like a lawyer, but like a woman who had lost everything. She talked about the nights she cried in silence, about the documents she was never allowed to read, about promises broken when no one was watching. Some people looked away, some leaned forward. For the first time, the courtroom felt different, not because she was winning, but because she was finally heard. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet realization formed. They may have money, they may have power, but today, I have my voice. And she wasn't going to waste it. The courtroom was no longer quiet, not because people were speaking, but because everyone was listening. Her words still lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, the confident rhythm of the opposing lawyer faltered. He cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, avoided eye contact. The judge leaned forward. Do you have any evidence to support your claims? The question cut deep. For a moment, doubt crept into her chest. Evidence cost money. Lawyers knew where to find it. She didn't. But then she reached into her bag. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a small stack of papers, old emails, handwritten notes, dates scribbled in the margins. Nothing fancy, nothing polished, but they were real. These are the messages I was never supposed to keep, she said softly. They told me they meant nothing, that I was overreacting. Her hands shook as she passed them forward. The courtroom murmured. The lawyer objected quickly, loudly. Your Honor, these documents are irrelevant. The judge raised a hand. Let me decide that. As the judge read, the room shifted. Something invisible began to crack. The lawyer's confidence drained, replaced by irritation, then concern, because the truth has a way of doing that. She stood there, realizing something powerful. She didn't need a lawyer to tell her story. She needed courage to show it. For years, she had been silenced by fear, by money, by power. But now, her silence had turned into proof. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the balance in the room had changed. The courtroom felt different now. Not louder, not softer, just honest. The judge sat back, fingers folded, eyes no longer rushed. Time had slowed, as if the truth demanded space. After a long silence, the judge spoke. These documents raise serious concerns. The opposing lawyer stood up quickly, trying to regain control. Objections, technicalities, familiar tricks, but they didn't land the same way anymore. The judge raised a hand. Enough. That single word carried more weight than all the arguments that came before it. She stood still, barely breathing. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. For years, the judge continued. The justice system has been mistaken for something only money can access. The room was silent. But justice, the judge said, does not belong to lawyers alone. Her eyes filled with tears. The judge ordered a pause in the proceedings. Further investigation, protection granted. Not a final victory but a fair chance. As people slowly stood to leave, something unexpected happened. A woman from the back of the courtroom approached her. Then another. Quiet nods, soft words of support. You were brave when whispered. She stepped outside into the daylight, the sun warming her face for the first time in months. She hadn't won everything. She hadn't erased the past, but she had reclaimed something priceless. Her dignity, her voice, her right to be heard. And she understood now. Justice doesn't always arrive with expensive suits or polished words. Sometimes, it arrives when someone refuses to stay silent,